The other day we were discussing about opioid analgesics, and I told you the effects of morphine. What does it do? We went over the ADME of morphine and its pharmacological actions. Rest of the opioid analgesics will be pretty much the same. Their potency will change slightly here and there. Some synthetic opioids have slightly better what do you call potency, especially the new ones like pethidine and fentanyl, which we'll be discussing. But along with their potency, the what do you call consequence of side effect or something like that will increase as well. It's what you call the risk will increase in as well, especially in specific patients who might have some specific disorders which these drugs can target. In any case, the first drug that we'll be discussing in synthetic today will be pethidine. So now pethidine is also called meperidine in some textbooks, or in some what do you call books you will find it as meperidine. Now, pethidine, this works by the same way. It will interact with opioid receptors and the actions are blocked. The action of pethidine itself can be blocked by using naloxone. The same way, in case of morphine poisoning, how you give naloxone, pethidine works the same way as morphine. It will block opioid receptor. It will interact with opioid receptors and it will stimulate opioid receptors, causing analgesia and some other functions. If you want to stop the action of pethidine, you can give naloxone. Now, one thing about pethidine is it is around 1/10 in potency as morphine. It is not as strong as morphine at the same dose. If you give the same dose of morphine versus same dose of pethidine, you will get about 1/10 of the potency as morphine and pethidine. All right, so I'll write that down. It has 10th the potency of morphine at the same dose. All right, fairly weak in that logic, but there are a few advantages. See, generally pethidine is given intramuscular, and what you call onset will be very quick, but the thing is that it will only last for around 2-3 hours, so you cannot give it for longer procedures, or you'll have to give another drug along with pethidine to maintain that kind of analgesia, or to maintain whatever you're trying to achieve. All right, there is something called balanced anesthesia for which these opioid analgesics are used as well. Balanced anesthesia, if you remember, is a type of anesthesia that we discussed, in which you are basically giving the patient a pre-anesthetic. You are giving several such drugs so that the patient's anesthetic experience, all right, is nice, in the sense that they recover, they go into anesthesia very well, and they recover from anesthesia very well without a lot of side effects and all of that. That is something called balanced anesthesia, which we are trying to achieve. All right, by giving balanced anesthesia, you make sure that the process of anesthesia, or the process the surgery, let's suppose if the patient is undergoing that, it is very smooth. Okay, that is your hope. To do so, what you will do is, other than using just analgesic, other than using only anesthetic, sorry, you will use drugs like opioid analgesic. Now, one thing you need to remember is that whenever we are giving opioid analgesics, the need for anesthetic will decrease. So let's suppose I am giving 10 mg of an anesthetic. Let's suppose I'm giving 10 ml of halothane. Okay, for example, I'm just giving an example. Let's suppose I'm giving 10 ml of halothane to a patient. Okay, if I give this alone, it is working as a anesthetic. Whereas, let's suppose I add a opioid analgesic, which I'm giving as a pre-anesthetic. I'm giving some anticholinergic drug to decrease reflexes, and giving some emetic so that emesis does not occur, and I'm giving a bunch more drugs. What will happen is, specifically because of this opioid analgesic that I'm giving, or any other analgesic that I give, the requirement for this anesthesia will decrease, because your anesthesia does not have to work as much. Okay, that is one use of opioid analgesics that you will see a lot. They are used in surgeries, or specifically before surgeries, to achieve balanced anesthesia. The dose of anesthetic that is required once you give an opioid analgesic will decrease. In turn, the what do you call, you can put it this way: if the dose of anesthetic requires decreases, the side effects that can happen from the anesthetic will also decrease. Risk of toxicity from anesthetic decreases. Right, so it is helpful for the patient and for you as well later on to control the patient. All right, so I hope you understand the concept of balanced anesthesia. Opioid analgesics can be used, specifically morphine, pethidine, fentanyl. Fentanyl is one popular one that is used for what you call balanced anesthesia. All right, sometimes even surgical anesthesia. You can use morphine, you can use fentanyl. Both of them are pretty popular. Coming back to pethidine, see, as I told you, it does not have any as strong analgesic properties as your morphine, but there are some advantages. Those advantages include there will be no cough suppression because of what you call pethidine. As such, it will not affect your respiratory system. It will not cause the release of histamines, meaning it is safe for asthmatics. If you want to give asthmatics, you cannot give morphine in asthmatics because morphine causes histamine release. Histamine will cause bronchoconstriction. This we already went over. If there is a lot of histamine being collected in your respiratory region, or in general, if the amount of histamine increases, the patient might have a bronchoconstriction and it can precipitate a asthmatic attack. In such a sense, it would be better to use an alternative drug, something like pethidine, which can be used in asthmatics or in patients you do not want to disturb, in patients whom you do not want to disturb their respiratory system, things like that. Okay, uh, so it will not cause cough suppression and it has very less histamine release. Okay, all of that. So it is safe in asthmatics. One thing is that it has abuse potential, though. People can abuse this drug, same as the other drugs. This fellow can also be abused. It has abuse potential and it can cause tachycardia. Okay, it will stimulate your vasopata center and it will cause tachycardia, but there are no smooth muscle spasms. If you remember in what do you call this thing, morphine, I told you there will be effect on your smooth muscles and it can cause constipation, right? That does not happen with pethidine. So if you're trying to give for a long period of time, it might be ideal to give pethidine as a drug because there is lower chances of meiosis occurring and there are lower chances of constipation occurring in a patient. All right, this drug is metabolized by your liver, and it is absorbed orally very well. Right, lasts for around 2-3 hours. T half is around 2 to 3 hours, and it is excreted by urine. Right, so that is about pethidine. Coming to the next drug, which is fentanyl. Mechanism of action will be the same for all opioid drugs. Mechanism of action is the same. Fentanyl, okay, blockage, stimulation of opioid receptors, right? Mu, kappa, and delta. So fentanyl is a pethidine congener, meaning it is something that is, think of it like something that is derived from pethidine. Okay, so it works like pethidine because it is somewhat derived from pethidine. So it is a pethidine congener, but the advantage is it is 80 to 100 times more potent than times more potent than morphine, at least in analgesia and analgesia and respiratory depression. So you might think that it is ideal, we can clearly replace this with morphine, but no, it will also cause as much amount of respiratory depression. So the dose of fentanyl that you have to give will be very, very, very low. Okay, at the same dose, let's suppose I'm giving 0.5 mg of morphine versus you give very small doses. Okay, if I give, if I'm giving 0.5 mg of morphine versus I'm giving or let's suppose I'm giving 1 mg of morphine or 2 mg of morphine, for example, I'm giving 2 mg of morphine versus I give 2 mg of fentanyl. At the same dose, it has 80 to 100 times more potency, meaning what I will do is I will decrease the dose or I will increase the frequency, the number of times I'm giving. I will decrease the frequency, sorry, I will space it out more. So instead of giving 3 times a day, I might give it 1 time a day or 1 time in 2 days, things like that. Okay, you can play around like that a little bit because though it has very, very good analgesia, it will have very, very good respiratory depression as well. Before you can treat or you can decrease the pain of the patient will go into respiratory arrest and all of that will happen because of excessive amount of respiratory depression. This drug is also very highly lipid soluble. Okay, so there is that. It will get absorbed very easily because it is highly lipid soluble. Duration of action is very very short. Okay, it will last around 30 to 40 minutes. That's it. So if you're trying to induce anesthesia, very good as a pre-anesthetic, but it will not last very long. Okay, so it will enter brain and it will produce peak analgesia within 5 minutes, but it will, I'll just write DOA, duration of action is around 30 to 40 minutes. Very short duration of action. And this fellow enters brain and produces peak analgesia within 5 minutes. So very very quick action. Okay, as soon as you give fentanyl, you'll start seeing its effect within no time. Right, within 5 minutes, the patient will have peak analgesia after IV. Okay, not oral. After IV. If you give IV, then it will happen. All right. Generally, this is used as a pre-anesthetic. Okay. Most often than not, it is used as a pre-anesthetic. Sometimes for cancer patients, you can use it for cancer patients or patients with chronic pain. In them, you can give a transdermal patch. Okay, you'll put a fentanyl patch on them, and you can use that for what do you call these chronic pain or cancer patients. Okay, it might work. Now, this is about your what do you call drugs of opioid analgesics. We'll talk about one specific drug which is antagonist of your opioid analgesics. Now, why you need to know about this is in case of poisoning, you need to know how it works and what you need to do. If because morphine poisoning is very real and can happen very very quickly. Okay, so the window of the amount of time that you will have to counteract its effect will be very short. You have to work very fast. So these are called opioid antagonists. Opioid antagonists. As the name suggests, now when we were talking about opioid analgesics, we knew these fellows, morphine or pethidine or heroin or whichever it is, it goes and stimulates your alpha, beta, and alpha, kappa, and delta receptors, right? Naloxone, the main drug here will be naloxone. Okay, so naloxone. You also have naltrexone, but naloxone is correct. This fellow will be a competitive agonist or competitive antagonist for all those opioid receptor, meaning like let's suppose on your cell, let's suppose on one of your cell you have a receptor like this, which is let's suppose this is your mu receptor and here is your delta receptor. One second. Right, let's suppose this is the delta receptor and this is the kappa receptor. Okay, all of these three are opioid receptors. What morphine will do is, so this is morphine. Morphine will go and cause a agonistic effect, meaning it will increase the action of all these receptors. Okay, it will stimulate the action of all these receptors. Naloxone will compete with morphine. So it will literally, if you remember competitive inhibition in enzymes, last year we studied something about competitive inhibition. Even this year in general pharmacology, when I was telling you about antagonists, I told you something about competitive inhibition or competitive antagonist. So basically what this fellow will do is it will compete with morphine for all of these spots. So meaning to let's suppose, if I put it in a very simple term, let's suppose this is a morphine molecule which is coming and trying to attach here. Okay, and another morphine molecule coming and attaching here, another morphine molecule coming and attaching here. This should normally happen whenever I'm giving morphine. When I give naloxone, what will happen is, I'll change the color. One second. Naloxone will come and it will literally replace this fellow, or put it more in a better way, rather than replacing, it will not let it attach to that receptor. So morphine will be competing with, or naloxone will compete with morphine for that same position. So let's suppose naloxone is this, or let me put black, easier to understand. So this grayish color, whatever it is, this is naloxone. This fellow will come and attach in the same place as morphine. It will not let morphine come and attach to its place on the receptor, meaning it is competitively inhibiting that receptor, because of which there is antagonism. That receptor cannot be stimulated anymore, because of which you will get basically there be no analgesia. Morphine is the one which is causing analgesia by stimulating these receptors. Naloxone will competitively inhibit or it will compete with morphine for that same position on the receptor. Okay, because of which it will not be able to stimulate those receptors. In turn, there is no analgesia. Here the problem is in case of morphine poisoning, when you have given slightly excessive dose, if the patient is more susceptible, or let's suppose the patient is going into respiratory depression, some patients are more susceptible to the same dose. Okay, like 2 mg in, let's suppose I'm giving 2 mg of morphine in Atul and I'm giving 2 mg of morphine in Anjali. The same dose of drug might work more in Atul and less in Anjali. Or to put it another way, there is higher chance of Atul going into respiratory depression, God forbid, but him going into respiratory depression because he's more susceptible. Okay, this is only an example I'm giving. Because of which, in those conditions, even if you are giving the same dose, you cannot know. Patient to patient, it will change. So you have to keep naloxone ready. If you are seeing a patient who is immediately having difficulty in breathing and they are not able to what you call breathe properly, at that period of time you should immediately administer naloxone. All right, this is what naloxone will do. I hope you understood what is naloxone doing here. That is the mechanism of action. It will generally work for around 3 to 4 hours, more than enough to counteract the complete dose of morphine that you have given. All right, one thing is, this fellow, if you give it orally, it will undergo first pass metabolism, naloxone. So it is better to give it IV. Okay, 0.4 mg of naloxone IV is given, because oral will undergo first pass metabolism and a lot of drug will be lost because of that. And specifically used for morphine overdosage. More importantly, in your neonatal asphyxia, in the sense that if a mother is going into labor, let's suppose a pregnant lady is going into labor, and in labor someone is giving her morphine, okay, in the to ease the pain or whatever. During that period of time, I told you, if you give morphine to a patient who is going into labor, there is a very good chance that morphine will cross the placenta and it will go into the vertical baby, and it will cause apnea. The baby will not be able to breathe properly. That is called neonatal asphyxia. Okay, so to counter that condition, you can give naloxone. If you remember, I told you you can inject naloxone, a little bit of naloxone in the umbilical cord. The naloxone is used there. All right. Uh, Another use of naloxone is it can be used to diagnose opioid dependence. Okay, because what will happen is, if someone is opioid dependent, meaning they have been abusing opioids for a long period of time. Let's suppose they are a morphine addict or something. Uh, some residual amount of drug will be present in their body, or their receptors will continuously be in a state of stimulus. Okay, where they are addicted and where they are kind of in a sedative state. Okay, in that condition, if you want to diagnose the patient on surface, because of tolerance, what will happen is, even on surface, if they look normal, they have developed a lot of tolerance and they are an addict. In that condition, if you are giving naloxone, what will happen is immediately withdrawal symptoms will start happening. So they will start sweating a lot, they will start vomiting, all of that will happen. They might start shivering, they will have fever. Withdrawal symptoms will precipitate. So naloxone can also be used for diagnosis in such senses. Okay, specifically to diagnose opioid dependence. Okay, in that condition you can use. Now, some nursing implications that you need to keep in mind whenever we are giving opioid analgesics is that you have to monitor respiration at all periods of time, because whenever you are giving a opioid drug, especially something like morphine, there is a very good chance that the patient will go into respiratory failure. You never know which patient will go. So keep monitoring the respiration very closely. If their respiratory rate falls below 14, okay, your normal respiratory rate should be between 16 to 22. Some books में 16 से 20 रहता, but definitely over 16 or 18. Okay, it should be in that range, not anywhere close to 14. So if it is going below 14, immediately intimate the doctor and start the procedure of giving naloxone and all of that. All right, and watch for tolerance. If some patient has been taking these drugs, because most of opioid analgesics have abuse potential, they can be abused very easily. So watch for tolerance. If they keep abusing it, what will happen is they will develop tolerance. If they develop tolerance, they will need more amount of drug to get the same effect. Okay, the same as alcoholism. To get the same amount of same effect, you'll have to increase the dose eventually as you keep on drinking more or something like that. Right. Especially in case of patient controlled analgesia, where you're giving the control of analgesic to the patient. In that patient, you have to specifically be careful for development of tolerance. Right. So this is about opioid analgesics. I hope you understood. We start um, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now, analgesics, I told you initially when we started analgesics, they are divided into opioid analgesics and non-opioid analgesics. They will have something called they will have opioid ring, okay, and they will directly come from opioid opium, the plant, okay. That is why they are called opioid analgesics. These are synthetically made. Okay, most of them are synthetically made, and they do not have the same effects as opioid analgesics in the sense that the main non-opioid analgesic that you will be studying is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Okay, these are over-the-counter uh, painkillers. Okay, something like your aspirin or paracetamol or things like that. Okay, piroxicam, diclofenac, all of those are over-the-counter OTC drugs. All right, at least some of them should not be, but you will get them very easily, and they are not as good at analgesia, or they will not cause as strong analgesia as opioid analgesics, but these will not have any CNS suppression altogether. Okay, very very little CNS suppression if there is also, and it will not have the same effects as opioid analgesics. No respiratory depression, no sedation, nothing of those sorts. Okay, constipation nahi hota. Those are some advantages of giving non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, but these will not work in case of chronic pain. If someone is having chronic pain, debilitating pain, in that condition these will not work. You'll have to use opioid analgesics. Okay, now NSAIDs, these are also called NSAIDs. Okay, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are now NSAIDs. Okay, so that is why it is called non-NSAIDs, right? Sometimes in some textbooks or in some exams you will also find this in a way called non-opioid analgesics, refers to the same thing. Okay, they do not have a what you call opioidal ring, or they do not have a steroidal ring. Because of this they'll be called non-opioid analgesics. First of all, we'll come to the mechanism of action, because all NSAIDs will work by the same mechanism of action. That is the most important one. Uske baad we'll get into classification. The classification of NSAIDs is a little big. Now, see, as I told you, some advantages of NSAIDs is they will not suppress or they will not depress your CNS, and they will not cause any physical dependence, because there is no CNS effects. There will not be dependence. People generally will not develop dependence with NSAIDs. Okay, and they are weaker analgesics. How they work is, in your body there is a particular compound called arachidonic acid. Okay, I'll just write the whole thing. This you studied about last year. Technically this is a revision of last year's biochemistry. We studied about this, I don't remember which chapter, but we did study about this arachidonic acid. We also studied about this is inflammation. Whenever there is what you call cell damage, I told you, whenever there is a bacteria coming and causing cell damage, the what you call cell debris will be converted by phospholipase A2 into arachidonic acid. Cell surface का cell debris, उस सेल सरफेस के ऊपर एक एंजाइम रहता. Okay, there'll be a small enzyme called phospholipase A2 present on the cell surface that will convert any cell debris, whatever cell is dying and whatever waste material of cell is coming out, that will be converted into arachidonic acid. So generally you will see arachidonic acid at the site of damage or a site of inflammation, but you can find it elsewhere as well. It is not that you will only find it at the site of inflammation, but a lot of it will be present in the site of inflammation. In any case, what will happen with arachidonic acid is, so this fellow will undergo two reactions. Okay, depending on the type of enzyme that is acting on it, two things will happen to it. So we, okay, the first thing is, if an enzyme called cyclooxygenase, this is the more important one that we need to concentrate. I'll tell you about the other one as well. Cyclooxygenase. Okay, it is also called COX, COX. Okay, If cyclooxygenase acts on arachidonic acid will give prostaglandins, prostaglandins and prostacyclins. I'll tell you the difference between them in a bit, but prostaglandins and prostacyclins. This will get you'll get. And if arachidonic acid is being acted upon by lipooxygenase, okay, this fellow is called LOX and OX. Hmm. If it is being acted by lipooxygenase, this fellow will form leukotrienes. Leukotrienes are an inflammatory mediator. See, this will happen during inflammation as well. We studied this in the initial chapters of your pathology. Whenever there is inflammation, arachidonic acid will cause the formation of prostaglandins, prostacyclins, and leukotrienes. They will in turn act as what you call mediators of inflammation. They will cause some inflammatory reactions, like they will increase what you call body temperature. They will cause pain and all of that. We'll get into the details of that, but this is the basic mechanism of what happens with arachidonic acid. Okay, now here in NSAIDs will particularly concentrate on this part of the reaction. Why, I will tell you in a bit. Okay, for now इतना तो समझ में आया ना, arachidonic acid है, if it is being acted upon by lipooxygenase, so let's suppose there is 10 molecules of arachidonic acid. Okay, AA लिख रहा हूँ मैं arachidonic acid को. If there is 5 molecules of lipooxygenase, you will get 5 molecules of leukotrienes. Okay, and if there is 5 molecules of cyclooxygenase or something like that in that ratio, you will get 5 molecules of PGs. Okay, you will have PGE1, PGE2, kitne ki types रहते हैं. We'll get into that later, but those are prostaglandins. Okay, this is the basic reaction. ऐसा होता. Now यहाँ से what is the important part is, please feel free to stop me at any time, okay, if you're not understanding, or if you want me to repeat any particular part. Haji. So coming to our reaction with arachidonic acid forming forming prostaglandins. Now your cyclooxygenase, the enzyme COX, has two different types. Okay, two different types of cyclooxygenase are present: COX1 and COX2. Okay, the different type of enzymes रहते. What is their importance? If COX1 acts on if COX1 acts on arachidonic acids, I'll put it here. Let's suppose it is causing COX1 is acting on your arachidonic acid, cyclooxygenase 1. You will get prostaglandins, specifically PGE2, okay? And you will get thromboxane A2, TXA2. You have studied thromboxane A2 in clotting. Okay, thromboxane A2 is responsible for what you call stimulating new platelets to aggregate, especially during injury. Thromboxane A2 will be a factor that will cause aggregation of platelet and it will cause blockage of wound. All right, try to remember wound formation or wound closing, clot formation. Okay, in that you studied about thromboxane A2. I hope you remember. If you don't, just go over it once in physiology. See, this is how it will tie in. Pharmacology, pathology, and physiology, they go hand in hand. One cannot occur without the other. All right? You need to know the base of one or the other to understand this. All right. So if COX1 is acting, you will get prostaglandin E2 and thromboxane E2. Okay, both of these are important for your body. Prostaglandin A2 का काम क्या है? This fellow will what do you call, protect the lining of your stomach. If you remember, we studied PUD long ago, peptic ulcer disease. In that I told you prostaglandins, okay, they are responsible for mucus secretion, and they will go and act on your mucus cells and in your stomach, and they will cause production of your mucus, and they will also cause production of bicarbonates. Okay, bicarbonates will directly decrease the acidic level in your stomach, and the mucus lining of your stomach is reinforced by action on your mucus cells. So if mucus cells are stimulated, they will cause more mucus to be produced, and it will basically what do you call, increase the lining of mucus on your stomach, okay, protecting your stomach. So PGE2 is very important and thromboxane A2 is very important. there is another enzyme or another type of COX, which is COX2. Okay? Whenever arachidonic acid is acting through COX2 or COX2 is acting on arachidonic acid, you will get something called PGI2. These are called prostacyclins. Prostacyclins will cause local inflammatory reaction. Okay, so this is the basic difference. Whenever there is injury, okay, let's suppose you cut your hand or something like that, वहाँ पर see, whenever there is injury there will be inflammatory reaction. If you see, if you cannot see, does not matter, but there will be an inflammatory reaction specifically at that spot. Whenever you cut your, if you have some wound or something like that, the prostaglandin that you will see there will be PGI2, or specifically it is prostacyclin rather than prostaglandin. Okay, this fellow is responsible for local inflammation. Through NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, we ideally only want to inhibit this fellow, but it is kind of difficult because most of the drugs we have, they will non-selectively inhibit COX, meaning they will end up inhibiting both COX1 and COX2. Okay, I'll repeat that once again. Your cyclooxygenase, the enzyme called cyclooxygenase, that fellow is responsible for the formation of prostaglandins from arachidonic acid. Cyclooxygenase has two different types, okay, COX1 and COX2. COX1 causes the formation of prostaglandin E2 or prostaglandins in general, which are responsible for, reinforcing your stomach mucosal lining and decreasing the acid content in your body, among some other functions, important functions. It will also cause what you call increase in GFR. It will cause what you call basically vasodilation near your renal substituent, renal this thing, because of which diuresis occurs through prostaglandin synthesis. Okay, यहाँ पर another thing is thromboxane A2 will cause platelet aggregation, so it is very important for clotting. So in this case you can conclude that COX1 is very important. Okay, point 1. Point 2, COX2, the second type of COX enzyme, this fellow will cause the formation of PGI2, which is prostacyclin. Prostacyclin is something that will be formed when there is local injury or local inflammation. Okay, through non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, we would ideally want to only inhibit PGI2, not PGE2 or thromboxane A2, because these two are very important. We do not want to stop this. We only want to stop this, okay, to stop that inflammatory reaction at that spot. We do not want to what they call touch PGE2 and thromboxane A2. But sadly, that is not completely possible, at least with not all of the drugs. Most of the what they call non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that you will see in the market, they are non-selective COX inhibitors. Non-selective ka matlab, they will not select in between COX2 and COX1. They will invariably inhibit both COX1 and COX2. What you want is a selective COX inhibitor, in the sense that it should selectively only inhibit COX2. Selective COX2 inhibitors बोलते हैं, वो भी drugs है, but they are not used as much. Okay, there's something called celecoxib, paracoxib. We'll get to that. But those are selective COX2 inhibitors. What you generally see: aspirin, paracetamol, ibuprofen, your meclofenic acid, your phenylbutazone, your indomethacin, all of those, they are diclofenac. Diclofenac is actually preferential, but all of the previous ones that I told you, they are non-selective, meaning they will not select in between COX1 and COX2, and they will invariably inhibit both PGE2, thromboxane A2, and PGI2. Okay? Because of which some beneficial functions of your prostaglandins are also lost. Now, if you remember in peptic ulcer disease, I told you someone is taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs for a long period of time. In them, there is a very good chance that duodenal ulcers can occur because of increased amount of acid production. When we were discussing peptic ulcer disease, you had both duodenal ulcers and gastric ulcers. Gastric ulcers are mainly occur, or the ulcers in your stomach mainly occur if what you call the lining, mucosal lining gets damaged, or if there is a H. pylori infection. Duodenal ulcer will occur when there is increased amount of acid production. Increased amount of acid production will not cause damage to your stomach, but it will slow down and it will damage your duodenum. ठीक है, यहाँ पर वही प्रॉब्लम आता, if someone is taking NSAIDs for a long period of time, you will lose the beneficial effects of thromboxane, meaning bleeding time will increase. You will not be able to clot as well. Your protective function of your stomach will be lost. So ulcers, you will start seeing peptic ulcers, both the duodenal ulcer and gastric ulcer sometimes. other than decreasing inflammation. Okay, so this is the main mechanism of action of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now all the drugs that we'll discuss will work one way or the other using these mechanisms. Okay, they will either non-selective है बोले तो they will completely inhibit COX. Preferential, you only have three classes. Okay, in this you have non-selective, which will not select in between COX1 and COX2. You have preferentially COX2 inhibitors, meaning most of the drug will inhibit only COX2, some of it will inhibit COX1, and you have selective COX2 inhibitors which will only inhibit COX2. Okay, so as we proceed in the next class, you will understand a little bit more, but I hope you understood this much. Take your attendance now.